welcome to Yamoja Speaks podcast with your host, Shalonda. This podcast is dedicated to talking about personal development, as well as topics regarding trauma healing, traumatic experiences that we've had, and how to overcome those traumatic experiences and live the lives that we want to live. We pull from the background of foster care, but this podcast is dedicated to helping anyone who have experienced traumatic issues in their childhood and want to find ways creatively to resolve them. If this podcast interests you, let's jump right into it. We are discussing accepting emotions. I want to talk about improving the emotional health that we have for ourselves. And in doing so, that means that we are accepting the pain, extreme, or scary emotions. And accepting those emotions really helps us to improve our emotional regulations, and it reduces the mood swings that we have and improve the balance in our lives, especially when we want to achieve it. So let's go into when we don't really accept our emotions and understanding what happens when we find the ways to accept our emotions, right? So when we don't accept our emotions, it usually feels uncomfortable when we have these emotions of sadness, fear, shame, rejection of those emotions, and judging ourselves. It results in ways of coping. We tend to look for coping skills that we are familiar with. Maybe we've seen it in our immediate environment, our community, even our families. And it's really negative behaviors, negative habits of smoking, drinking, eating too much or too little, or relationships that are not good for us as well. All of these factors is just a distraction. It means that we're really not dealing with the root cause of it, which is how we feel and why we feel that way. Right? We're so eager to push it away or distract ourselves. I can tell you when I was in college, this was really big for me to distract myself away from feeling those emotions, and it comes back around. You definitely have to work through the emotions, through what might be going on, and get into the root cause of it so that you don't fall into the negative behaviors of smoking, drinking, or some of the toxic behaviors that we seen growing up. However, I do think that emotions help us to understand our experience and the entire world, right? Society around us. We have emotional acceptance, right? And I feel like we might have a scale where we have this emotional acceptance. So for those minor things where we're just angry, sometimes we understand that we're angry, but we demonstrate anger in different ways. Sometimes it can be lashing out because we don't really know how to control how we behave in a manner that's suitable and appropriate, or sometimes we just have not been taught how to accept it and deal with our own internal anger, and so we lash out in certain ways and really not accepting it to say, I'm angry and I need to take a step back from this conversation, or I need to remove myself from this environment. I think those are more appropriate answers. Or when we see someone and they are demonstrating a level of anger, we want to be judgmental to them. But I read this book and it was so awesome about controlling the chimp, basically. And it basically broke down the ways that our emotions are wired first over our logic. So sometimes our primitive mind goes into how we feel first, which is why our emotions are more extreme. And we really do have to take that split second to think and calm ourselves down, like, whoa, I just jumped out of my skin for a second and now I have to reel it back. But taking that slight second to breathe and calm ourselves down really helps us to regulate our emotions. And not to judge ourselves or to judge other people, because sometimes when we're interacting with someone and their initial reaction is anger, it has nothing to do with us personally. Sometimes it's their own frustration, but we're just here experiencing or being implicated in this experience because we're so close to them. And so sometimes it's making us uncomfortable to experience their anger, but taking a second to realize that it's not personal sometimes, and they're trying to regulate themselves. So when we see other people in their primitive mind, right, to be more considerate and passionate and compassionate for them, and offering them ways that they can de-escalate. But otherwise, you can remove yourself from the situation if you don't want to get too close to someone who's angry. But if you find yourself in that situation, thinking of ways to calm yourself down. What are some thoughts that take you to a good place? Taking a second to breathe for 5 seconds is a good way for regulating your emotions. Another way is by accepting. That doesn't mean accepting the pain, of course, but accepting that you feel certain ways, not feeling the pain itself, but accepting that you are sad. And it's okay to be sad sometimes. Accepting that you are frustrated, and it's okay to be frustrated. Not accepting the pain, right? So we're working through the trauma, right? We're working through the sadness of if we have grief with someone, if we lost a friendship and we lost a job. It's okay in those moments to be sad. It's okay to accept what happened, but it's also okay to work through those feelings and having really good emotional coping mechanisms, should I say, to accept it, but to also process it and get over that distressful time. You're bringing your awareness to whatever event is occurring. So now we're going to move into ways to accept those emotions. Practicing mindfulness, right? What is that? It's a really good talking point, but the practice of mindfulness focuses on becoming aware of the present moment and slowing down, being more attentive to what we're doing. So we're observing our thoughts, we're observing our emotions and our experiences in that real time. And we're labeling it sometimes. We're giving it a meaning to that moment. And I think when you're slowing down and you're really trying to understand it and processing it, you're taking your time with it. And for me, let's say that I'm doing the dishes. I am not trying to hurry up and get them done. So it takes me a little bit longer because I'm smelling the water, and I usually put bleach in it. So I'm smelling the bleach and I see the suds, and I take a second to just kind of breathe as I'm washing the dishes. So I'm being more present in that time. That is mindfulness. I'm not really rushing through to complete that task so I can move on to the next task. I'm really focusing in on what I'm doing in that moment. And it can be simple as brushing your teeth and becoming more mindful as you're brushing your teeth, where the toothbrush is. And one trick is to do it with the opposite hand. So if you're dominantly using your right, to trick yourself and use your left, because now you're focusing on the actual process itself. It slows you down because you're not used to you doing it this way. You're not used to you using your left hand.